Good afternoon, Senator Campbell. It's really quite a treat for us to have you join the Circular Strategies podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you today.
We're going to get right into it with the first question for you to consider, and that is if you were to look back 10 years from today and say we were successfully transitioned to the circular economy, what is one tangible change in our daily lives that would make you feel most proud of your efforts?
Well, I think that having less packaging, having less plastic in our environment, actually, I could answer that question best by telling you what it's like. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners out there and you know what it's like to go to countries in Holland and, Europe and some of the provinces in Canada. It would be a lot more like that, where there's much more of a visceral awareness and a societal attention to waste and how we're dealing with our waste.
Yeah, getting that resource, extracting the value instead of throwing that value away. Uh, just seems like so much common sense sometimes, you know?
It's so true, and especially for a state like Tennessee, we're 48th in the country for recycling, and the Southeast, I recently found out, is the sixth largest economy on the planet. And we're surrounded by states that are also at the bottom decile for recycling. So it's that's got some pros and some cons. On the one hand, it's new uncharted territory in terms of solving the problem. But
Right.
of course, it tells you that we're also facing some serious challenges here.
Yeah, I think for all of us, engaging with the circular economy is relatively new, and so it's pretty spread out with the effectiveness. But the good news is we're on the journey, I guess.
It's true, and it's really for Tennessee right now. We're at an inflection point where we're either going to become the dumping ground for this region, or we're going to be a leader in circular economic opportunity for material aggregation and distribution. And I say that because our landfills are at capacity. So we are going to have to make a decision here. And right now in Scott County in Tennessee, we have people pushing to expand a landfill there. To the Roberta 2 landfill, and there's a big fight going on there. If they are able to expand that landfill, it will be the largest landfill in the entire country. And we have waste management people, the duopoly here in Tennessee, that are the haulers and the landfillers that are really pushing for that because they don't want things to change, and they also would like to continue to see the revenue from that. But in the meantime, we have all these companies in Tennessee that really need those materials. I mean, genuinely, especially now with the tariff situation. So it's more important than ever that we push Tennessee to go in the right direction. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to environmental issues, we don't. And this isn't the most exciting, hot topic issue for people, but it affects their lives way more than a lot of other issues do.
I couldn't agree with you more. On a personal note, what was the specific aha moment in your career where you realized that linear model that you've been describing wasn't just inefficient, but was fundamentally incapable or incompatible with the future that we want to build? When did that spark hit?
I didn't have an aha moment. It's been a slow sort of revelation, but it's always substantiated by the activities that I see going on in this state and the disregard that I see, quite frankly, for our environment. And not just within the realm of waste, but within, the realm of being good stewards of our environment in general. I mean, we are a right to work state, and so that means that we're open for business to a lot of corporations that want to come here and get cheap labor. And we have people in the political realm, which is where I live, of course, up in the legislature, who are very interested in making sure that resources are available to corporations from out of state. I am not against business. I think business is wonderful, but in the spirit of your show, which I love, I think that circular economic opportunity is something that is way more productive and beneficial to Tennesseans than continuing to just sort of provide resources to the corporations at our environmental cost.
Thank you. Many people see circularity as a recycling initiative, but you see it as an economic engine. How do you envision the impact on Tennessee short term and long term by prioritizing restoration over just straight consumption?
That's a great question. And I came to that revelation, kind of forced myself into that, but it's actually become something that has taught me a lot because I initially was just trying to figure out how to get a bill over the finish line in Tennessee, right? And so, my colleagues on the environment and agriculture and energy committee, and I knew that they were not going to be interested. It's almost like it's a bad word to talk about climate change or environment or anything like that. And I knew that the only way that we were going to get across the finish line was to make it about business, to make it about a profit and jobs. But then, I sort of started, I read Abundance by Ezra Klein and started, reading about this space and traveling all over the world and learning about it. I actually really convinced myself or learned in the process that really true circular economic processes are a win for everyone. And you really think, when you think about energy and oil and how hard big oil has pushed at trying to prevent us from being able to do that, you realize that there is so much that we're missing out on because we're not pursuing those opportunities.
Yeah, we've also come to that revelation that we truly have to talk about the dual impact that we can gain from doing this. And it's value restoration, value recovery, and environmental impact. And, I think that's probably been a healthy revelation for us, at least it has been.
Yeah, it's also it gives you the opportunity to learn a lot about your environment because we're so algorithmically isolated into these pockets. And I've learned so much about Tennessee businesses. I grew up here and I had no earthly idea, for example, that we are the capital for tile, ceramic tile in this country because we have this ball clay deposit in our state that is the clay that people need. And that was such an interesting revelation and getting to go see these factories where they're making this tile and these Italian companies that have come over here to have their tile operations happening in the state of Tennessee. And they need the glass. They need that glass because it's basically sand. Why are we burying all this glass in landfills when these companies could be using it?
100%. 100%. From that standpoint, what do you think is a sleeping giant in this space, an industry or a resource that people aren't talking about yet, but will be the backbone in the future?
Well, I think if you get further into this, which I hope we can, maybe extraction. So juxtaposed to looking at future circular economic activity, which is the focus right now, actually going back to some of these just massive mountains of landfills that we have and extracting some of the gold that's already in those, right? Because those landfills are still problematic, even if we passed EPR legislation that took half of the packaging roughly out of our landfills going forward. I think it would be important for us to still look at going back and extracting materials out of the landfill, if for no other reason than that, the water proximate to those landfills is poisoned, and we're already seeing problems with, and we have been for years, frankly, with people who live downstream, and it's bad for our health.
Yeah. There's some of those landfill projects going on in the Midwest, and we kind of keep our eye on it a little bit and listen to what's how the progress is. But it's certainly a daunting task.
You mean there are some projects where they're doing extraction in the
Yes,
Midwest?
yeah.
Oh, really? And how is it going? Are they able to get a lot out of them?
Like I said, there's lots of challenges. from both a technology and cost standpoint that I think it's sputtering.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we don't as a country invest in circular economic we're very myopic, and we have a system that is set up that rewards greed, frankly. And I I think that's, where regulatory opportunity is best used. I'm also of the opinion that we've been in some areas over regulatory to the point of, preventing things from happening. So there is a sweet spot, and that's really the idea behind circular economy is that you're not, blocking the circular motion with any one of those inputs. And for that reason, think that a red state is a really good place to actually get something over the finish line that works, especially when we're looking at EPR processes rolling out across the country right now that aren't working.
Right.
So we need harmonization. It's kind of crazy when you think about it to have every single state come up with a packaging or battery or any kind of EPR process, because it shouldn't be a state by state thing. We really probably should have a federal policy, but that's not the way it is. And in as much as that's the case, I think that the pros, that are having to implement these policies are really facing a daunting prospect of having 50 different EPR plans. And so this red state solution that we're offering here, which really actually allows business to control the conversation, is a great solution to that, because I think it gives, number one, the pro and these brands that are already doing this in other countries, 30% of the world. They're already doing it in 30% of the world. It gives these brands the opportunity to show us how it works. But it also happens to be the case, and sometimes this is the bane of my existence, but happens to be the case that red states fall in line. So I think if we are able to get a Tennessee waste to jobs plan over the finish line, we could have an Alabama waste to jobs or a Kentucky waste to jobs. And that would be a really big, big step in actually making that process work for our country.
There's a whole lot to what you just said. I think EPR certainly, um, maybe he's gotten a few black eyes. There's opportunities on the critical mineral side and national security side that are also could probably use some regulatory support. And in light of that, I think there's a mindset that's transforming. This question really tries to get at that. That is, circular sustainability is also framed through a lens of doing less or sacrificing. How do we pivot to a narrative to show that it's actually more vibrant, more innovative, more fun than the one we currently have now? Have you given
It's,
any thought to
yeah.
that?
Well, and I do think, yes, and I think that that's a big part of our message with this bill, is because it is very much by definition progressive in terms of, being a process that is creating jobs, is actually providing materials. And when you have the volatility of tariffs and you have, landfills at capacity and things like that, it really does become a very exciting economic prospect for transforming the economy of an entire region, because Tennessee happens to be a state that touches more states than any other state in the country. So we're really perfectly geographically located to lead this charge. We also have the confluence of three huge major state or national highways here, and we have a rail system that is effete, but certainly something we could resuscitate to actually employ that as well. And then we are a barging community. There are all kinds of transportation opportunities, and it's unfortunate that the waste hauler industry doesn't see the opportunity here. Anybody who's traveled to places where there are effective Canada, where there are effective EPR programs in place already, knows that that is an incredible financial opportunity for the haulers as well, especially in a state like Tennessee, where we don't have meaningful recycling infrastructure, and they are the transportation backbone of all waste processes. They could actually be looking at this as an opportunity, but we found in the legislature that they're really kind of, our main opposition in this. I'd say them and the bottlers.
Wow. It's a good segue. Government can set the stage, but it can't perform and play alone. So, from your vantage point, what does government need to do, and what would your invitation be to entrepreneurs and the creators listening today?
I think in this space in particular, and I want to say that I don't feel this way about some environmental, probably most environmental issues, but in this particular space, I think government needs to create the opportunity for the pro to exist, for the organization to be established, and then get out of the way with the caveat that there needs to be oversight subsequent to it. But in terms of setting up the plan, and the reason I say that that works in this space is because 30% of the world's already doing this. So what that means is that you have brands that actually really need the parity. They're in a situation where they are competing against companies in this country that don't have to do that, and economies of scale are such that they can't have sort of different plans for when it comes to packaging for every market. So when I was in business school, one of the first things we learned was that the packaging that you see on the shelves is all about, branding and drawing people's eyes. And so the bigger your package, the more likely you are to sell it. And that's a problem. And that's one of the problems that we address with EPR. And the reason that, we even here in Tennessee are sometimes seeing things like our Amazon packages that we get have become paper and smaller. That's not magic. That's because Amazon's having to comply with EPR policies in other countries. That's why that's happening here. So, it's really in a rare space here where government can get out of the way for the most part. Like I said, you have to have some kind of, TDEC in this case, overlooking the compliance and all of that. But allowing the plan to be established by the brands that are already doing this in other countries and soon to be in other states, I think is a great way for this particular relationship between government and the brands to go.
Well, thank you so very much. I'd like to leave the audience and our conversation with one last question, and that is, if you had a magic wand to bypass the legislative friction for just one day, what is the most significant circular policy you would implement to jumpstart this transition?
Well, if I had a magic wand, first of all, I would want it to be on the federal level because, state by state policies don't work as well. But I would obviously magically override the influence that big oil has had on circular economic processes, because we could long ago have solved the problems that we're facing right now. And we continue to butt up against absolutely ridiculous misinformation and disinformation that I see on a regular basis with my colleagues in the legislature. As a matter of fact, I once made the huge mistake of bringing up the words climate change on the Senate floor. And you would have thought that I had, cussed or something. It was absolutely crazy, the silence that followed, because they are not comfortable with that concept. So the pushback against science and the advent of disinformation, and I guess I would want to wave a magic wand and have us make facts matter again. There is a thing called science, and it works, and we should be respectful of that.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you, Senator Campbell, for your time today and joining us.